Now, I want to ask you about Ben because a lot of people, when he was in Detroit, they thought of him as this mastermind who locks himself in a room and just draws up plays, and that's all he is. What have you seen of him as a head coach? Just you mentioned the intensity, the attention to detail. Like, do you have like, the physicality apparently has been out there a lot. Like, what have you seen of him as a head coach? And have you been surprised that this is actually who he is?
Well, I'm not necessarily surprised because, just being in the NFC North, we have enough connections to Detroit, whether it's people in the organization, around the organization, or just reporters. And so when you're doing your deep dive into head coaching candidates, and we did sort of get a head start because Matt Eberflus was fired the day after Thanksgiving. Um, we did in Chicago constantly have this debate about, quote unquote leader of men versus offensive guru. And, Mike Vrabel was a candidate, although it seemed like he'd probably go back to New England as soon as that job opened. Um, with Ben Johnson, it was like, okay, well, we know what this guy is. He's made it very obvious. We got 3 years of data that he's had the best offense in terms of EPA. Over that's a significant sample size. So we know what that is. Can he command a locker room? No, can he command the room in front of a whole team? Can he be that leader that you also need to be as a head coach? And you talk to people in Detroit and they're like, yeah, I don't know where this is coming from, where he just sort of locks himself in a room and, he's just drawing up X's and O's. He is intense. He holds players accountable. But we haven't seen that, right? When you're talking about coordinators becoming a head coach from the outside, you just see the press conferences if you're trying to watch them, right? So, but he got here, and really from his first press conference, it was impressive. And you could tell that there was going to be a different level of detail and intensity and accountability. We've heard that before, so we wanted to see it in action. Well, when it's your first practice and you throw the starters, kick them out of the drill temporarily, it's a pretty good sign that he's going to actually hold these guys accountable. I think that kind of set the tone in training camp, and it's been consistent ever since. And that's the key. You got to have that. You can't just do that once and then relax. You got to do that consistently every day. And to this point, we have seen that.
Well, he is the head coach of the team, but one of his biggest priorities is the quarterback, and we'll get into that right now. The offensive coordinator Declan Doyle was on this show last week, and he said that we gave Caleb Williams a lot initially. We want to see how much he could do with all of that, and eventually, it's the coach's job to shape it up for what best fits him. I want to ask you, just seeing Caleb from minicamp to now the end of training camp, what have you seen with him, and how has he taken all of that information to where it is now?
Yeah, and I saw that interview. Nice job, Declan Doyle. That was good stuff on here. I, I I think that's the right approach. We've seen that approach before. I mean, they tried to, I think, really to Mitch Trubisky, actually, instead of Justin Fields, where they tried to do the same thing. We're going to kind of overload this guy in the offseason and then pare it back. Uh, that's not necessarily a revolutionary football coaching technique or idea. I think it's the right thing to do. And if it doesn't work out, that doesn't mean that it was necessarily wrong. So I was a little hesitant when you're kind of hearing that because I've covered that before. Um, and it was ugly early. I mean, really, I think the first week of camp was not very good. They've been, I know there's like controversy about keeping training camp stats, but don't shoot the messenger. The Bears are keeping those stats for the quarterbacks, not just Caleb, all of them. They want these guys at 70% completion percentage. And they're on a daily basis, giving them printouts of what the results were from practice. Not the end of the world, just something to sort of track. And I kind of like it because I've been tracking it too. And it kind of helps you see if the progress has been linear. I not on a day-to-day basis, but from where Caleb is now, as we're recording this mid to late August compared to where he was a month ago when camp started, there's no question that he's gotten better. I think Sunday night's game against the Bills was a good example of that too. Yes, it's the preseason. Yes, they weren't playing the starters, but in terms of how quickly he was getting the ball out, his footwork, being decisive, understanding what he was looking at pre-snap and then post-snap. Again, it's going to look completely different against the Vikings on Monday Night Football when Brian Flores is dialing up all kinds of crazy stuff compared to what the Bills were doing the other night. But there were some rotations, post-snap rotations and coverage where they were going from single high to cover 2 or cover 3. And Caleb seemed to be seeing that. So I do think that this heavy sort of overdose of information that they were giving him, and I think it's fair to say he was trailing Tyson Bagent and Case Keenum, the other quarterbacks in that room, in terms of digesting that information and understanding it. You were seeing that on the practice field. There's a bunch of pre-snap issues, cadence issues, and don't get me wrong, it's not all perfect, but I do think it's a great sign that, especially last week, they had 3 straight practices, which culminated in a joint practice against the Buffalo Bills. I thought it was Caleb's best week of practice. Ben Johnson later confirmed that after the game on Sunday night, and he carried that over into 14 snaps against the Bills. That went well. At this point, that's all you can ask for. It doesn't mean that he's going to take off once the regular season starts, but it is a good sign, because it would have been bad if, last week didn't happen, because last week was a significant step in the right direction.
Caleb has said he wants to be coached. And I wanted to ask you, like, when it comes to him overall from last year to this year, where has he grown the most going into year 2? I mean, you mentioned the full work. Have you seen the leadership, the command of the offense, the pre-snap, the decision-making football? Like, what have you seen from him that's taken the biggest leap going into year 2?
Well, I'd like to say, just based on what we saw last weekend, that it's the timing and getting the ball out faster. I need to see more of that, because I still, there just needs to be a larger sample size that needs to carry over to the regular season. What I would point to, though, that I think is more applicable to the offseason and training camp, and I'm hesitant to talk about this sometimes because I don't want to sound like a knock. I think every quarterback has to go through this, really every NFL player, but it's more important for quarterbacks. But understanding what it takes to succeed in this league, it's just a completely different animal than college, right? And so what I mean by that is, from everything I was told last season, his rookie year, was when he would show up in the morning to the time he left that building, there were no issues. I mean, there was no issues with buy-in. There was no issues with the work ethic. Everything was good. But I think we all know that to be one of these, all-in, really good quarterbacks, and you don't have to go too far to dig to see this stuff. Go watch the quarterback show on Netflix, right? And see what these guys are doing when they go home, and how their wives and girlfriends are quizzing them, on the call sheet and all this stuff. And that's just one example. And so I think it was more of him understanding that, during the season, this is pretty much all you do. You can have all these other outside interests. There's no problem with that. But you got to compartmentalize that so that when it's football season, it's go time. This is what we're doing. And I do think that this training camp's been very beneficial, because even in the offseason program, OTAs, these guys are only in the building, they're only allowed to be there for a certain amount of time, a few days a week. Training camp, it's like, okay, no, this is from sun up to sundown. This is all we do. And I think that has really helped Caleb. So if he can carry that mentality and that overall buy-in, and that, again, it's not a knock. It's just I feel like every NFL player who becomes really good eventually hits that point. Sometimes it's year 2 or year 3. Sometimes it's even later, where they realize, oh, if I'm going to survive, if I'm going to really reach my potential, this is what it takes in this league.